Peter, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
It really does seem as though we have hit sort of peak narcissism in the world of politics, doesn't it?
But can I say something? I do care about people being unemployed. And it is actually the case, I think, that a large amount of unemployment in our society is hidden.
It is.
People are classified as being self-employed when they're not really, or they're classified as being on disability benefit when they're actually unemployed. And there's been an awful lot of very vigorous hiding of it. And so when ministers say we've got unemployment down, I think they should be questioned about it. It's one of the most serious problems of our country, and what I hinted at in my column on Sunday is this: we have this great difficulty, as I think, largely because of the collapse of family life and the destruction of our education system, in finding people who are prepared to do hard work for reasonable wages, which is one of the reasons why governments have repeatedly brought in very large numbers of people from outside to cover that gap. It is a major social problem. And a lot of these people end up pretty much permanently on some form of
No, I get that. Well, I've never been in favour of this kind of working tax credit type system where people who don't get paid enough money somehow have their money bumped up by the taxpayer.
That's a subsidy for low-paying employers.
Exactly.
Dressed up as social concern. What we accepted that we had an economy of an awful lot of unskilled, low-paid work. And we made up for it by taxing the middle classes and making them pay those people higher wages.
Yeah.
Obviously, you want other people to be better off than they are, but what it ultimately,
up to a point.
But wages should be paid by employers.
But I'm not in
the
business of subsidising supermarkets for paying their people not enough money. Why should I? I spend my money as I wish to spend it. I don't wish to be told, and this is what I mean about this government and many governments. I don't wish to be told what they want to do with my money and how they spend it better than me.
In a thriving economy, unskilled work should be paid enough for somebody to lead a decent life.
Exactly.
The problem is that isn't happening.
And when I said people don't care about that, I didn't mean people didn't care about the unemployment thing. What I meant was people don't care about the government saying that they've got unemployment down.
I couldn't let it go by there because it is a big understatement.
No, sure. Let us talk as well, though, while we're here, about this whole cabal of people who seem to think that they now have the privilege and the right to run everything without really even now a nod to democracy, without even suggesting that people in their own party in the shires can vote for the person who's going to be running the country.
Well, again, I think the opposite to that is who you say the shires, but who is the Conservative Party membership made up of? Is it really nice old ladies in Shropshire and Wiltshire anymore?
I think there are some of them.
Or is it swivel-headed drug legalisers and think tanks in London?
I think it's a mixture of the two, and I think that's why it's split.
Look at how it came out last time. How did this vote for Elizabeth Truss materialise if the Tory vote hasn't changed? I mean, one of the big problems of Elizabeth Truss's political career was she ran into deep trouble over her personal life in the constituency she now represents, and an awful lot of central Tory party heft and David Cameron's weight was put into browbeating the local people of Norfolk, who were at one point derided as the turnip Taliban, to select her when they didn't really want to. So I'm not at all sure that the old, if you go, as I haven't been for some time, to Tory conferences, but if you look at the audience in Tory conferences now, it's not made up of nice old ladies who go to church on Sunday. It's an entirely different thing. So I don't particularly want them to decide who the next Prime Minister is. What the rule in this country is that the Prime Minister is chosen by members of Parliament. If he or she can command a majority, he or she can go to the palace and tell the king that they're ready to form a government. That's all that concerns me, and the democratic aspect of it is the general election. So the Conservative Party still holds a majority in the House of Commons, and so its members of Parliament really have. It seems to me,
I understand that is
the freedom under our constitution to decide. I won't object to that.
I understand that that's the system, but the trouble is, because they're so useless at it, they've already had a go at doing that, and they've failed to convince either the rest of the country and or the markets that the choice they made was right. The reason Rishi Sunak didn't win last time, though, is because they dislike him more than they dislike Liz Truss.
It's the meaninglessness of the contest which annoys me. What are they about? It's really like the Corleone family deciding who's to take over after the Godfather has died, and there's nobody really fitted for it, except that it's duller You don't get Luca Brazzi sleeping with the fishes. Luca Brazzi is spending more time with his family.
Yeah.
It's just people get driven into retirement or turned into the leader of the house or some other unwanted position, but there are no actual murders or massacres. But what is it about? It isn't about anything.
Well, we know what
because
it's about.
they have no purpose.
Grant Shapps has told me.
No reason for this party to exist.
No, Grant Shapps has told me what it's about, because the one piece of policy that he could ask me about was whether or not I didn't want to have Britain as the world leader of onshore wind.
And of course, this is a policy.
And I said I didn't want that.
This is a policy which the Conservative Party shares with the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party.
And the Green Party, presumably.
And indeed, the Green Party, and probably with Extinction Rebellion as well. So there isn't any argument. If you don't happen to think that blowing up all our coal-fired power stations was a good idea, and I don't think it was a good idea, then you have no representation in Parliament. And the Conservative Party, which, if it had anything to do with its name, would at least have somebody in it who was doubtful about this policy, would be perhaps on your side.
Well, I was wondering why
he
asked, of all the questions he could have asked me, the Conservative Party policy that I supported, that was the one he picked, because I was asking him about the high taxes that they're now imposing upon the world, on us in particular, the high spending that they now do, and the borrowing of all this money, which I suggested wasn't a particularly Conservative policy, and he came back with wind farms.
Well, this is the problem with the Conservative Party, is it used to boast that it was a disposition without a dogma, that it wasn't full of people whose minds were filled with dogmatic desires for a utopian future, and that was a good thing a long time ago. The problem is that especially since 1945, and even more intensely since 1964, the opposition to the Conservative Party has been deeply bound up with a lot of very serious dogmas about the family, about education, about foreign policy, about the health service, about the welfare state, about the way in which the whole country is governed. And the Conservative Party has never developed any counter-ideas to this. They've never come back and said, actually, what you're saying is wrong. They've just given into it, and they have become what they beheld. So the Conservative Party has become, effectively, a branch of the Labour Party. And yet it still pretends to be a Conservative Party and goes every few years to the country and says, we're a Conservative Party. Well, this is the reason why they're in such a mess. It is basically, the thing is a fraud on the country.
It is. Let me read from your own column, if you'll forgive me for a moment, because I actually screenshot this yesterday and put it out on Twitter, because I thought it was such a great summation of how we got to where we are, which is kind of what we're talking about. This is from Peter Hitchens' column in the Mail on Sunday yesterday. Our society is in ruins because politicians of all major parties ruined it. They attacked stable family life. They allowed the post-1960 BBC to wage a war against patriotism, religion and morality. They encouraged private debt. They removed wise controls on the twin curses of alcohol and gambling. They excused crime, let it rage, and failed to prevent the spread of dangerous illegal drugs. They neutralised the police and the courts. They destroyed manufacturing. They flung open our borders. They started stupid wars. They ruined the schools. They postponed the reckoning by borrowing and hoping something would turn up. I mean, I think that's the greatest summation of how we got to this dreadful place that I've ever seen.
Well, it's kind of you to say so, but it is, alas, all true. These things all
really
happen in my lifetime, and with startling little opposition. And there used to be, I mean, it was the case. You could, the guy who illustrated the old Ladybird books. Used to actually live on a council estate, I think, in the Midlands, and people said to him, "You've drawn," when he drew his pictures of Britain at that time, "you've drawn an idealised version." I said, "No, this is what it is like. People live civilised, reasonable, modest but productive lives. They have stable families. Their children go to good schools. Their wages cover what they need. Mothers can stay at home to look after their children. It wasn't paradise. It wasn't a golden age. There were many things wrong with it. It was, if we had then the money we have now, it would have been much more abundant, and lots of other things could have been nicer about it too. But the fact was, we had those things and we chucked them away for a series of social experiments, and also a series of economic experiments which have not worked. Because they were all declared to be undesirable, weren't they? Well, it wasn't. It was never quite put like that. For instance, the idea that you could weaken the bonds of marriage, which is a preoccupation of mine, was put forward on the perfectly reasonable grounds that lots of people were in unhappy marriages and wanted to be released from them. And one has to sympathise with that, but do you necessarily overturn the whole idea of stable family life to solve the problems of those individuals? I think not.
Yeah.
And there must have been a more sensible way of doing it than to make marriage effectively more easily dissoluble than a car leasing agreement, which is what we've done. And the effect of that on children has been catastrophic.
Yeah.
The attack on education. I've written the history of this, and I won't go on the details of it. But until the middle 1960s, most children in this country, in the state school system, got a decent education fitted for the lives they were going to lead, and that stopped when we introduced comprehensive schools, and it hasn't been so since. Ever since then, only the well-off get anything approximating to good education for their children. Otherwise, people get a terrible, disgraceful education for a first world wealthy country.
Yeah.
These were deliberate acts of policy, and they were just as the 1945 Labour government is famed for having instituted the welfare state, but my goodness, it was tough in the rules it applied. You got benefits if you needed them. But if you didn't need them, you didn't.
Right.
But after the 1960s, the whole attitude was changed, and it became an entitlement. And people mistake the hard, disciplined, serious, patriotic, in my view, socialism of the 1940s for the wholly different one which we came to have in the 1960s, which has not worked.
No.
It's actually caused more trouble than it has solved.
It really has.
Many of these things, and the Roy Jenkins Cultural Revolution at the time, and above all, the thing we discuss almost every week, the evisceration of the police and the courts.
And we were just told before the break that there's now a protest at Madame Tussauds, where Just Stop Oil protesters have thrown custard pies into the face of King Charles's waxwork. We thought we should have a look. Let's have a look at it now.
As suggested.
I mean, now is the time for action.
Sorry, can you not stand there, please? It's not loud.
To go in and
custard
pie them.
Yeah, well, I mean,
or indeed, if they could have waxworks of them blocking the traffic, and people who've been blocked would go and push them over.
I think we now know, for example, if you see any of them gluing themselves to the road, you just go and pour tomato soup over them, don't you?
That's
what they did to the Van Gogh painting.
Yeah, tomato.
It was tomato soup. So I think we're within our rights to pour mashed potatoes and tomato soup. You know, why not go the whole hog? Yeah. So I was talking to Grant Shapps earlier about a great many things, including the fact that much of the state didn't actually work. And I said, you know, the police in this country can't seem to arrest anybody. We've got a woeful record of convictions on most crimes, including some serious ones, and including burglary. And he started bleating on about how he'd been to the Bedfordshire Constabulary recently and talked to the police there, and they're doing a fine job, and they've recruited 200 more people. And I was like, yeah, but nobody is interested in that. They're interested in what the police are actually doing.
Yeah, so
and they're not doing very much.
And as they recruit, 200 more will leave because the police problem is turnover. But in any case, it's not how many you've got, it's what you do with what you have. But you just get the sense of cluelessness with people. I associate Mr. Shapps above all with the introduction of the horrendous e-scooter as well, which is now, they're really proliferating now, you probably see.
Oh, yeah.
And the problems which they will cause are so huge, and I do want to link his name very much with that, because I want people to remember when they get knocked over by them and see I hear stories from people who are working as paramedics that how often their users are now coming into casualty. That Mr. Shapps' name is remembered in arm in arm with that development.
Yes.
They seem incapable of addressing this. You try and put it to them, and they just have no idea. It may be because the Palace of Westminster is probably the only place in the country which is still adequately policed.
Yeah, I mean, whenever we see any of these protesters anywhere near either Westminster or Buckingham Palace, they actually do get dealt with properly.
Yeah, there's a police presence there, which is what we want.
Right.
We can't have it, but this is one of the many wrong things with our society. We have this nomenclatura elite of politicians who are protected from things which the public suffer.
Absolutely right. Let's talk a bit about emergency rooms, because there was a piece, I think, that I retweeted from your Twitter about San Diego and marijuana, where I was saying the other week to you that there's lots of now apparent evidence in California in particular of more people being admitted to hospital with psychosis as a result of the free laws on marijuana there.
Well, the thing is, this completely undermines one of the main claims of the legalizers. What they say, and what they've continued to say, even after it was demonstrably untrue, was that once you legalized, you'd be able to regulate the strengths of marijuana on sale, and therefore this kind of thing wouldn't happen. And of course, when you legalize, you don't actually stop the illicit dealers from operating. On the contrary, you probably increase their market. This certainly happened in California, where the moment anyone then tries to either regulate strengths or put taxes on the legally available stuff, the illegal dealers step in and provide untaxed marijuana, which is stronger.
And therefore cheaper as well.
But the whole thing is completely false. And I said when I heard this argument, this isn't true. The fact that something is legal means that immediately means that it's taxed, and therefore there will be a black market, just as there is in this country in smuggled cigarettes and illegally distilled alcohol, which are both legal and regulated, but it doesn't make any difference. And they wouldn't listen. They just sat there saying the same thing. And do you know, believe it or not, I was at a debate the other day on the same subject, and they were saying the same thing, that if only we had legalization, we could have regulation and the drug would be made safer. It's demonstrably untrue. The other thing is, of course, that for reasons of privacy, and also because no health service, either our national one or the American one, wants to start rebuilding the mental hospitals they destroyed in the 1960s, there is no real collection of statistics about the extent of mental illness. And so it simply isn't measured in the way that physical illness is. And the increases in it, which I'm sure are taking place because of wider marijuana use, are basically not registering on the national measures. You don't know it, but it is undoubtedly happening. And these cases from San Diego show that it's happening.
Yeah, but that's the thing about every public policy now. It's backed by what I would call rather nebulous alleged science, where they go, oh, but if we do this, this will happen, which is a product of these modelers, these kind of futurists, these people who say that, A plus B equals C, and you're supposed to just swallow it, and you're not supposed to question it. You're just supposed to go, oh, okay, then, so it must be a good thing.
Of course, we had the biggest instance of that during the COVID panic, and all kinds of claims were made about the danger of the disease, which were hugely exaggerated, and all kinds of claims were made about measures to control it, which were equally baseless and turned out to have no a proper objective scientific basis at all those rules about how far apart you could stand and the rest of it, and the great controversy about face coverings. It was all the Department of National guesswork, as it so often is, and people should question this stuff more.
Speaking of which, I mean, what do you make of those who say the reason why we need Rishi Sunak now is because he stewards the economy properly and well? This is the guy who got us into this mess, isn't he?
The one thing he can say for himself is that he did say that Liz Truss's plans would go.
Well, that's a very big talking point for his supporters.
That's you've got to give him that. But on the other hand, he was incredibly extravagant during the COVID panic, and an awful lot of our problems, particularly the inflation now gripping us, are entirely down to that and down to the cabinet which he belonged to, which took that course of action. So I'm not very persuaded by that.
No. And what about the prospect of an earlier general election than 2024-ish?
Well, you don't know. I know it's always unwise for any government to wait till the last minute to hold an election, because there's no room for manoeuvre. If something goes wrong in the last few weeks, then you're stuck with it. And they will probably want to go before then. On the other hand, they should have a new Prime Minister by the end of this week, in which case they'll want to at least try and get him into the saddle and try and straighten some of the mess out beforehand. They're not obliged to. It's perfectly proper for there to be a 5-year gap between parliaments. And I don't think this argument that because it's a new Prime Minister, you have to have an election is actually right. We are not a presidential system. We do not elect our Prime Ministers directly. Yeah. If we did...
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't want an election.
I'm against all this stuff.
I don't want an election because it's a new Prime Minister. I want an election because the entire Tory party appears to have disappeared up its own backside.
Yes, but if you get an election, I have for many, many years made very little difference whether the Tories or Labour were in power. On this occasion, it's actually not quite that simple. I don't think even now that Labour will necessarily get a majority. And if it doesn't get a majority, it will need allies. And I think partly because those allies want it, and partly because Labour can see the future, they will take the opportunity to make a major constitutional change. We will never have a proper British first-past-the-post election again. And a lot of people say, yes, well, we need that. It's good. We have to change. We need proportional representation. It's fairer. So actually, what proportional representation has meant in every country which has adopted it is permanent government by the left. And that's the danger, that though this isn't a particularly conservative government, in fact it's not one at all, we could lose all hope of ever getting a conservative government ever again if the Tories lose the next election. And there is a grave difficulty for me and for everybody else. What on earth do we do about that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. A good point at which to end. Peter, thank you very much indeed. I'm sure